Pardo Yachts walk-around dayboat range has become a benchmark and the fastest growing manufacturer of dayboats in the world. Today we're on board the 50, along with the 43 is one of the most popular models for those looking for a simple, easy, spacious and comfortable dayboat. Today let's take a look at this 50-footer in regards to the handling and performance as well as the onboard features so that we know what your day on the water might look like. The helm station here on the Pardo 50 is very comfortable and centrally located, which I really like. Importantly, from this position, we can see all three corners of the vessel very clearly and everyone on board, so very good from a safety point of view. The dash is made of molded carbon as well as the T-top, and this is really aimed at reducing the weight up top. So we've got weight down in a vessel, always gives us better reliability, better performance and better handling. The Pardo 50 is powered as standard by twin IPS 600 engines. You can then upgrade from the standard to an IPS 700 package, or what we have on this vessel today, which is the IPS 800 package, delivering even more power, higher top speeds and better maneuvering. Before we take the vessel up to speed, I'll just talk through the dash and the working deck here that we have on the Pardo 50. We've got twin 16-inch plotters from Garmin combined with the Volvo Penta display here. So everything you need, including fish finders and everything for running the vessel. The radio remote is up the top and all the navigation switches, anchor lights, bilge pump alarms, everything for running the vessel down here by the wheel. The wheel itself is adjustable depending on your preferred driving position, and the throttle's positioned just to the right-hand side. Now, IPS engines are famous for their joystick configuration, so this gives us finger touch maneuvering of the vessel just with a joystick here. When driving the vessel, you can either stand as I'm doing here, and if you put the bolster down like so, you can then seat with your feet resting on the footrest down here, feeling very protected below the windscreen. The windscreen's a long way above my head, and then I've got excellent sun covering here. There are 3 seats at the front of the vessel here. I call them co-pilot seats either side, and then we have a central access through to the rest of the seating. But overall, a very comfortable, safe, well-protected helm station. I'm just going to take the Pardo 50 for a quick burn and we'll just have a look at some fuel calculations as well. So we obviously have the IPS 800s on this vessel, and this is really designed to give us maximum speed and maximum comfort. So at the idle speed, we were doing about 1.3 litres per nautical mile, and that idle speed was about 600 RPM. So if I double the RPM up to about 1200, then the fuel consumption jumps to 2.7 litres per nautical mile, and I'm cruising at about 9 knots. This is very comfortable. People seated at the back would be very stable at this speed. It's quite a sedate, fast cruising speed. Not much wash coming out behind either, given that the waterline length on the Pardo 50 is as long as possible. Now if I'll take us up to about 2000 RPM. So 2000 RPM, the fuel consumption's now jumped up to 5.9 litres per nautical mile, call it 6 litres per nautical mile, and we are doing 18 knots. Now this is probably the most inefficient speed to be doing because we are just not sitting on the plane, we're just off the wake. We're pushing quite a bit of water and the wake is obviously quite large out the back. So if I pull this up to say 2,500 RPM, you feel it really jumps up and we actually jump onto the plane very, very nicely. Having said what I just said, when we were at that 2000 RPM speed, we weren't really on an angle. You know, again, that long waterline was keeping us as level as possible as we climbed through the speeds. So jumping up to 2,500 RPM now, we're doing 6.5 litres per nautical mile. So we're only doing a little bit more in terms of fuel per nautical mile. However, the speed has jumped up to 26 knots, so that's 8 knots faster for only a little bit more fuel used whilst covering the same amount of ground. And in fact, I can see now that we're actually on the plane and settled, the fuel consumption hasn't changed per nautical mile from 18 knots up to 26 knots that we're doing now. So we're burning the same amount of fuel per distance traveled, we're just getting there sooner. Now if I take it up, I'll go 3,000 RPM now, coming up to 3,000 RPM, and the engines, it's worth talking about engine noise now because they're not hugely noisy. You know, they're big Volvo engines, they're deep in the belly of the boat, we're on an open boat, you can hear a bit of wash, you can hear the engines. It's obviously a power boat, but it's nothing too intense and you can still maintain conversation. sitting on 3,000 RPM now, and the engines are working really nicely. Fuel consumption has jumped up to 7.2 litres per nautical mile, and we're sitting on 33 knots. So we're close to the top end of what this vessel is expected to do with this engine package. Now jumping up to wide open throttle, or WOT as some people call it, we can see the fuel is actually now 7.2 litres per nautical mile. So that hasn't really changed, but we're now hitting 34.5, about 35 knots if we weren't going into this headwind. The boat feels very, very confident in the water. That long water line is helping us maintain contact. You know, Sydney Harbour can be renowned for being quite choppy, and this kind of boat, when the Sydney Harbour chop kicks in on a Saturday afternoon when the southerly hits, is going to eat it up and get you all home in a lot of comfort after your day on the water. So driving this vessel at speed, whilst it is a large vessel with a 5-metre beam and it's 50 feet long, it is incredibly agile. The steering is very light. The IPS engines are so well positioned in this boat. It feels very confident and very reassuring. It certainly doesn't feel like it's too much when you're driving at this speed. Now, this vessel in offshore conditions is an amazing performer as well. A few weeks ago we took it from Sydney Harbour north about 20 nautical miles to Pittwater, and there was a 3-metre southerly swell running, and we had people on the front of the vessel enjoying the ride. It was comfortable, it was smooth, and they were not getting wet. So when driven in the right way in all sorts of conditions, the Pardo hull with the reverse bow is incredibly confident. We did also come back later that evening in very similar conditions, and it was just a stunning ride as well. So a very confident offshore performer, as well as being perfectly suited to this wonderful Sydney Harbour dayboat experience. Okay, so let's anchor up and take a look through the vessel.